The smoke was still rising from the charred remains of the schoolhouse when they dragged Meredith Fletcher through the streets of St. Elmo, Colorado, her wrists bound with rough hemp that cut into her skin with every stumbling step. The September morning of 1878 had dawned clear and beautiful over the Rocky Mountains. But now the air tasted of ash and accusation, and the faces of her neighbors twisted with rage as they screamed for her blood. She had taught their children for 3 years, had spent patient hours helping them master their letters and numbers, had wiped away their tears and celebrated their triumphs. Now those same parents wanted to see her hang from the nearest tree, and Meredith could barely breathe past the terror clenching her throat. The fire had taken 6 children, 6 innocent lives snuffed out in the night while the town slept, and somehow, impossibly, she was the only one they blamed. Sheriff Thomas Grayson held her arm in an iron grip as he marched her toward the small jailhouse at the edge of town. His face was granite hard, unreadable, but his fingers dug into her flesh with barely restrained fury. Behind them, the mob swelled larger with every passing minute, their voices rising in a terrible chorus demanding immediate justice. "I did not do this," Meredith said for what felt like the 100th time, her voice hoarse from smoke and weeping. "Please, you have to believe me. I would never hurt those children. I loved them." The sheriff said nothing, just pushed her forward more roughly. She stumbled on the wooden boardwalk, her simple cotton dress torn and stained with soot. Her dark blonde hair had come loose from its customary bun, hanging in tangles around her face. She was 22 years old, and she was going to die for a crime she did not commit. They threw her into the single cell at the back of the jailhouse, and the iron door clanged shut with a sound like a death knell. Sheriff Grayson stood on the other side of the bars, his weathered face lined with grief and anger. He had lost his own nephew in the fire. "Deputy Richards found your handkerchief in the schoolhouse," he said quietly. "Right near where the fire started. It had kerosene on it." Meredith gripped the bars, her knuckles white. "I left my handkerchief there yesterday afternoon. I used it to clean the lamp chimneys like I do every day. Of course it would have kerosene on it. That does not mean I started the fire. You were the last one to leave the building that night." "Because I was preparing lessons for the next day. I locked the door when I left, I swear it. Everything was fine. The lamps were all extinguished. I checked them twice like I always do." The sheriff shook his head slowly. "The door was still locked when we found it this morning." "Locked from the outside. Those children were trapped in there, Miss Fletcher." The horror of it washed over her again, making her knees weak. She sank onto the narrow cot, trembling. "Someone else must have a key, or they picked the lock after I left. I do not know how it happened, but it was not me. You know me, Sheriff. You have known me since I came to this town. Do you truly believe I could do something so monstrous?" For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been doubt. But then voices rose outside, the mob gathering strength, and his face hardened again. "What I believe does not matter. The evidence speaks for itself. You will stand trial, and may God have mercy on your soul." He turned and walked away, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Meredith heard the outer door open and close, heard him addressing the crowd outside, his words muffled but firm. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried not to fall completely apart. The faces of those 6 children haunted her. Little Emma Rogers with her gap-toothed smile. Thomas Bennett, who had finally learned to read just last month. Sweet Mary Sullivan, who always brought wildflowers for the teacher's desk. They were all gone, and the whole town thought she was responsible. She did not know how long she sat there, numb with shock and grief, before she heard the outer door open again. Different footsteps this time, lighter and more measured. A man appeared at the cell door, and she looked up through her tears. He was tall and lean, dressed in worn denim and a faded blue shirt, a dusty Stetson in his hands. His face was tanned from years in the sun, with strong features and steady gray eyes that studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. A gun belt hung at his hip, the leather well worn and practical. "Miss Fletcher," he said quietly. His voice was deep and calm, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in Texas or perhaps Kansas. "My name is Henry Xavier. I am a ranch hand at the Silver Creek spread about 10 miles north of here." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, confused. "I do not understand. What do you want with me?" He pulled up a wooden chair and sat down, still holding his hat. His movements were easy and unhurried, like a man who had learned patience through hard experience. "I want to hear your side of what happened, because I do not believe you did this." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, hardly daring to hope. "You do not." "No, madam, I do not. But you do not even know me. Why would you believe me when everyone else in this town has already decided I am guilty?" Henry leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes never leaving her face. "3 reasons. First, I have been watching you around town for the better part of a year now. I have seen how you are with those children, how patient and kind you are with them. A person cannot fake that kind of caring, not consistently. Second, the facts as I understand them do not add up. And third, I know what it is like to be blamed for something you did not do." Something in his voice when he said that last part made her think there was a story there, a painful one. But before she could ask, he continued, "Tell me exactly what happened yesterday, from the time you arrived at the schoolhouse until you left for the night. Every detail you can remember." So she did. She told him about the normal school day, about the lessons in arithmetic and reading, about how she had dismissed the children at 3 in the afternoon and watched them all leave safely. She described how she had stayed behind to grade papers and prepare the next day's lessons, how she had cleaned the lamp chimneys with her handkerchief, as she did every day, how she had carefully extinguished every flame before locking the door at around 7 in the evening. She told him about walking back to the boarding house where she rented a small room, about eating a quiet dinner alone, about going to bed early because she had been tired. Henry listened without interrupting, his face thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Did you see anyone else around the schoolhouse when you left?" he finally asked. She tried to remember, picturing that evening in her mind. "There was a man across the street. I did not get a good look at him because the light was fading, but I remember thinking it was strange because he seemed to be just standing there watching the building." "Can you describe him at all? Tall, I think. Wearing a long coat. That is all I can remember." "I did not think much of it at the time." Henry nodded slowly. "The fire started around midnight, according to what I heard. Someone said the smoke was spotted by the night watchman at 12:15. I was asleep in my room at the boarding house. Mrs. Winters can confirm that. She is the landlady." "I believe you," Henry said simply, and the conviction in his voice made something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "But we need to prove it. We need to find out who really did this." "Why are you doing this?" Meredith asked, her voice breaking. "You do not know me. You owe me nothing. This could only bring you trouble." He met her eyes steadily, and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. "Because it is the right thing to do. And because I have some small idea of what you are going through right now, being accused when you are innocent. That is a special kind of hell, and no one should have to face it alone." Before she could respond, the outer door burst open. Sheriff Grayson strode in, his face dark with anger. "Xavier, what the hell are you doing here?" Henry stood slowly, settling his hat back on his head. "Just talking to the prisoner, Sheriff. Last I checked, that was not a crime. You have no business here. Get out. I will leave when I am ready." There was steel beneath the calm words, a quiet strength that made the sheriff pause. "I have some questions about this case." "There is no case. We have our suspect, based on circumstantial evidence." A handkerchief that could have been planted, and the fact that she was the last known person to leave the building. That is not enough to convict someone of mass murder. The sheriff's face reddened. 6 children are dead, Xavier. This whole town is grieving. They want justice. "They want vengeance," Henry corrected quietly. "Those are not the same thing. Justice means finding the person who actually committed this crime, not just hanging the most convenient suspect." "I do not have time for your philosophizing. Get out of my jail." Henry did not move. "I am going to investigate this on my own. I will talk to witnesses, look at the scene of the fire, ask questions. If Miss Fletcher is guilty, the evidence will show it. But if she is innocent, I aim to prove that too. You have no authority to conduct any kind of investigation." "I do not need authority to ask questions and look at facts. This is still a free country, last I checked." The two men stared at each other for a long moment, the tension thick in the small room. Finally, the sheriff's shoulders slumped slightly. "Do what you want, Xavier, but stay out of my way. And when that mob decides they have waited long enough for a trial, I may not be able to stop them." "Then you had better make sure they wait for a proper trial," Henry said evenly. He turned back to Meredith and his expression softened. "I will be back, Miss Fletcher, and I will find the truth." "You have my word on that." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He held her gaze for another moment, and something in his eyes promised that he meant every word. Then he turned and walked out, his spurs jingling softly with each step. Sheriff Grayson followed him out, muttering under his breath. Meredith was alone again in the cell, but something had changed. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt a tiny flicker of hope. Someone believed her. Someone was going to help her. She did not even know Henry Xavier, did not understand why he had chosen to stand up for her when the rest of the town wanted her blood. But she clung to his promise like a lifeline in a storm, and she prayed that he would be able to find the truth before it was too late. Outside, the September sun climbed higher in the Colorado sky, and the ashes of the schoolhouse continued to smolder. The town of St. Elmo settled into an uneasy watchfulness, grief and anger simmering just below the surface. And somewhere out there was the person who had really started that fire, who had locked 6 children inside to die. Henry Xavier was determined to find them, no matter what it took. He walked down the main street with his hat pulled low, aware of the hostile stares following him. News traveled fast in a small town, and people had already noticed him visiting the accused woman in jail. But Henry had learned long ago not to let public opinion dictate his actions. He had his own code, his own sense of right and wrong, and he would follow it regardless of what anyone else thought. His first stop was the burned remains of the schoolhouse. The building had been a simple wooden structure at the edge of town, and now it was nothing but charred timbers and ash. The air still smelled of smoke, acrid and bitter. A few townspeople stood around the perimeter, staring at the ruins with hollow eyes. Henry recognized some of them as parents who had lost children in the fire. He approached the site carefully, mindful of their grief. No one stopped him as he began to examine the remains, though he felt their eyes on him constantly. The walls had collapsed inward, leaving only the stone foundation and a few blackened support beams still standing. The roof had caved in completely. Henry walked slowly around the perimeter, looking for anything that might tell him how the fire had started. The door frame was still partially intact, and he could see the heavy iron lock hanging from a piece of charred wood. It was definitely locked, just as the sheriff had said. He knelt down to examine it more closely, running his fingers over the metal. There were no scratches or marks that would indicate someone had picked it. Either someone had used a key, or the door had been locked from the outside with the children already trapped inside. But how had the children gotten back into the schoolhouse in the middle of the night? That was the question no one seemed to be asking. The fire had started at midnight, but school had ended at 3 in the afternoon. What had brought those 6 children back to the building 9 hours later? He needed to talk to the families, find out if the children had said anything about plans to return to the school that night. But first, he wanted to examine the actual point where the fire had started. According to the sheriff, that was where Meredith's handkerchief had been found. Henry carefully picked his way through the debris, his boots crunching on charred wood and ash. The interior of the building was devastated, everything reduced to blackened ruins. But he could still make out the general layout. The teacher's desk had been at the front, near the door. The students' desks had been arranged in neat rows. There was a small wood stove in the corner that had been used to heat the building in winter. The sheriff had said the fire started near the teacher's desk. Henry moved in that direction, searching through the ashes. It was difficult to tell much from the destruction, but after several minutes of careful examination, he noticed something. The burn pattern seemed to radiate outward from a specific point just to the left of where the desk would have been. And when he knelt down and sifted carefully through the ash, his fingers encountered glass. Pieces of a broken lamp, he guessed, so the fire had likely been started with a lamp or lantern, doused with kerosene to make it burn faster and hotter. That fit with the handkerchief supposedly found at the scene, but anyone could have done that, not just Meredith. And if someone wanted to frame her, using her handkerchief would be an obvious way to do it. "You should not be here." The voice made him look up. A man stood at the edge of the ruins, tall and well-dressed in a dark suit that marked him as someone of importance in the town. He had iron gray hair and a stern face lined with grief. "I am just looking around," Henry said evenly, standing up and dusting off his hands. "I know who you are." "Henry Xavier, the cowboy who thinks the schoolteacher is innocent." The man's voice dripped with contempt. "My daughter died in this fire, Mary Sullivan. She was 8 years old." Henry felt the weight of that grief, but he kept his voice steady. "I am truly sorry for your loss, Mr. Sullivan. No parent should have to bury a child." "Then why are you trying to protect the woman who killed her?" "Because I do not believe Miss Fletcher did this. And if she is not guilty, that means the real killer is still out there, free to potentially do this again." Sullivan's face darkened. "The evidence is clear. That woman started this fire and she will hang for it." "What brought your daughter back to the schoolhouse that night?" Henry asked. "School ended at 3 in the afternoon. Why was she there at midnight?" For just a moment, something flickered across Sullivan's face. Confusion or perhaps surprise. "I do not know. Mary went to bed at her usual time, around 8. I checked on her myself. But sometime during the night she must have snuck out." "Did she say anything about needing to go back to school? Was there something she had forgotten or some reason she might have wanted to return?" "No, nothing." Sullivan shook his head. "She was a good girl. She did not sneak out at night. Something must have lured her there." "Or someone," Henry said quietly. "Mr. Sullivan, I know this is painful, but I need to ask. Did your daughter mention anything unusual in the days before the fire? Anyone hanging around the school who should not have been there? Anything that seemed out of the ordinary?" Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. Finally, he said, "She did say something about a week ago. She mentioned that there was a man who had been watching the schoolhouse during recess. She said he made her feel strange, uncomfortable. But when I asked Miss Fletcher about it at church that Sunday, she said she had not noticed anyone. Henry filed that information away. Can you describe this man? Mary just said he was tall and wore a long coat. She did not get a close look at him. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. But that does not prove anything. Miss Fletcher could have had an accomplice. Or it could be the real killer, Henry countered. Mr. Sullivan, I understand your anger and your grief, but rushing to judgment helps no one. Let me investigate this properly. If I find evidence that Miss Fletcher is guilty, I will bring it forward myself. But if she is innocent, would you not want to know that? Would you not want the person who really killed your daughter to face justice? The older man's face twisted with emotion. For a moment, Henry thought he might actually be getting through to him. But then Sullivan's expression hardened again. You have until the circuit judge arrives next week. That is when the trial will be held. If you have not found anything by then, that woman hangs. And if you keep defending her, you may find yourself facing consequences as well. It was a clear threat, but Henry just nodded calmly. A week is plenty of time to uncover the truth. Sullivan turned and walked away, his back rigid with grief and anger. Henry watched him go, then returned his attention to the ruins. He spent another hour searching through the debris, looking for anything that might provide a clue. But there was little left that had not been destroyed by the fire. As the sun climbed toward noon, he finally left the site and headed toward the boarding house where Meredith lived. Mrs. Winters, the landlady, might be able to confirm Meredith's whereabouts on the night of the fire. And she might know more about Meredith's character and habits than she had shared with the sheriff. The boarding house was a neat two-story structure painted white with green shutters. A small garden flourished in the front yard, bright with late summer flowers. Henry knocked on the door, and after a moment, it was opened by a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pinned back in a practical bun. Mrs. Winters, he asked, removing his hat. Yes. And you are Henry Xavier, I presume. Word travels fast in this town. She looked him up and down appraisingly. You are the one who thinks Miss Fletcher is innocent. I am. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions. She studied him for another moment, then nodded and stepped back. Come in, then. I will not have my neighbors seeing me turn away someone who is trying to help that poor girl. The interior of the boarding house was clean and comfortable, furnished with simple but well-maintained pieces. Mrs. Winters led him into a small parlor and gestured for him to sit. She took a seat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. Miss Fletcher has rented a room from me for 3 years, she said before he could even ask a question. In all that time, I have never known her to be anything but honest, hardworking, and kind. The idea that she could have done something so terrible is absurd. Can you tell me where she was on the night of the fire? She came home at her usual time, around 7:30 in the evening. She had dinner here with me and 2 other boarders, Mr. Jameson and Miss Collins. After dinner, she went up to her room. I heard her moving around up there for perhaps an hour, and then all was quiet. Her room is directly above mine, you see, so I would have heard if she had left during the night. The stairs creaked terribly. You are certain she did not leave? As certain as I can be. I am a light sleeper, Mr. Xavier. Years of running a boarding house will do that to you. I would have heard those stairs if anyone had used them during the night. Henry felt a surge of relief. Would you be willing to testify to that at the trial? Of course I would. Though I do not know if my word will carry much weight against the hysteria that has gripped this town. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Xavier, what is your interest in this case? Why are you putting yourself at risk to defend a woman you do not even know? It was a fair question. Henry thought about how to answer it. choosing his words carefully. 7 years ago, I was accused of stealing cattle from the ranch where I worked in Kansas. The evidence looked bad. I had been seen near the herd the night they disappeared, and some of the money from their sale was found in my bunk. I was arrested and would have been convicted if not for one man, the foreman of the ranch. He believed I was innocent, and he investigated on his own time. He found out that the real thieves were 2 other ranch hands who had planted the money to frame me. They had copied my schedule and made sure to be seen in my clothes and hat, so witnesses would think they had seen me. If not for that foreman, I would have spent years in prison for a crime I did not commit. Understanding dawned in Mrs. Winter's eyes. So you know what it is like to be falsely accused. I do. And I know what it means when someone believes in you when the whole world is against you. That foreman saved my life in a very real sense. Ever since then, I've tried to pay that forward when I can. When I see an injustice happening, I cannot just stand by and do nothing. That is admirable, Mr. Xavier, but you should know that this town is in an ugly mood. People are grieving and angry and they want someone to pay. If you keep defending Miss Fletcher, you may find yourself in danger. I can handle myself, madam, but thank you for the warning. She smiled slightly. I have no doubt you can. You have the look of a man who has been through some hard times and come out stronger for it. She stood up, smoothing her skirts. Is there anything else I can help you with? Did Miss Fletcher ever mention anyone bothering her? Anyone showing unwanted attention or making threats, Mrs. Winters frowned thoughtfully. Not that I recall. She kept mostly to herself outside of school. She was friendly enough with the other townspeople, but she did not have many close friends. Teaching kept her quite busy. She paused. Although, now that you mention it, there was something. About 2 weeks ago, she came home quite upset one evening. When I asked her what was wrong, she said that someone had left a strange note on her desk at the schoolhouse. Henry's attention sharpened. What did the note say? She did not tell me the exact words. But she said it was vaguely threatening, something about how she should be more careful. She thought it was just a prank by one of the older students, but it had rattled her. Did she keep the note? I do not know. You would have to ask her. Henry made a mental note to do exactly that. Thank you, Mrs. Winters. You have been very helpful. I hope you can prove her innocence, Mr. Xavier. That girl deserves better than what this town is doing to her. He left the boarding house and headed back toward the jail, his mind working through what he had learned. The pieces were starting to come together, but he still did not have a clear picture. Someone had been watching the schoolhouse in the days before the fire. That same someone, or perhaps an accomplice, had lured 6 children back to the building in the middle of the night and locked them inside before setting it ablaze. And Meredith had received a threatening note, which suggested that she had been targeted deliberately. But why? What motive would anyone have for committing such a heinous crime and framing the schoolteacher for it? When he reached the jail, Sheriff Grayson was nowhere to be seen. A young deputy sat at the desk, looking bored. He nodded at Henry without much interest, and Henry walked back to Meredith's cell. She was sitting on the cot, her arms wrapped around her knees. When she heard his footsteps, she looked up, and the hope in her eyes made something in his chest tighten. You came back, she said softly. I told you I would. He pulled up the chair again and sat down. I have been investigating. I need to ask you some more questions. Over the next hour, he questioned her carefully about everything she could remember from the weeks leading up to the fire. She told him about the strange note that had been left on her desk, and when he asked to see it, she said she had thrown it away, thinking it was just a prank. She described the note as saying something like, "You should watch your back, teacher. Not everyone is as fond of you as those brats." She also told him about the man she had seen watching the schoolhouse during recess. the same man Mr. Sullivan had mentioned. When Henry pressed for details, she could only say that he had been tall and wore a long, dark coat, and that something about him had made her uneasy. But she had only seen him twice, and both times at a distance. "Is there anyone in town who might have a grudge against you?" Henry asked. "Anyone you might have offended or had a disagreement with?" Meredith thought about it, her brow furrowed. "I cannot think of anyone. I have always tried to get along with everyone. The parents have generally been pleased with my teaching. There was one incident last year where I had to discipline a student quite severely. Jacob Patterson, the blacksmith's son. He was bullying younger children, and when I confronted him about it, he became quite angry and defiant. I ended up having to speak to his father about his behavior." "How did the father react?" "He was embarrassed and angry. He gave Jacob a thrashing right there in the schoolyard, which I had not intended. After that, Jacob's behavior improved, but Mr. Patterson always seemed cold toward me. But that was over a year ago, and Jacob was not one of the children who died in the fire. I cannot imagine Mr. Patterson would do something like this." Henry made a note to talk to the blacksmith anyway. Sometimes grudges festered in unexpected ways. "What about other men in town? Has anyone made advances toward you that you rejected?" A faint blush colored her cheeks. "There have been a few men who expressed interest in courting me over the years. I turned them down politely. I have been focused on my teaching and I have not had much interest in romance, but none of them seemed angry about it. They were all quite gentlemanly." "Can you give me their names?" She listed 3 men, all of whom Henry knew by reputation. 2 were married now to other women, and the third had moved to Denver 6 months ago. None of them seemed like promising suspects. They talked for a while longer, going over every detail she could remember. Henry found himself increasingly aware of her as more than just a woman he was trying to help. She was intelligent and thoughtful, with a quiet strength that showed through even in these terrible circumstances. Her eyes were a deep blue, the color of the sky just before sunset, and despite everything she had been through, there was still kindness in them. She spoke about her students with genuine love, and it was clear that teaching was more than just a job to her. It was a calling. "Why did you become a teacher?" he found himself asking, even though it was not directly relevant to the investigation. She smiled slightly, the first real smile he had seen from her. "My own teacher when I was growing up in Missouri was a wonderful woman named Mrs. Harrison. She saw potential in me that no one else did, and she encouraged me to continue my education beyond the basic level. She lent me books from her own collection and spent extra time with me after school. When I was 16, she helped me get into a teacher's college in St. Louis. I wanted to be like her to make that same difference in children's lives." "You succeeded," Henry said quietly. "Everyone I have talked to says you were an excellent teacher. Those children were lucky to have you." Her eyes filled with tears. "Not lucky enough. They are all dead and I could not protect them." "That is not your fault. You did nothing wrong. The person who did this is the one responsible, not you." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me." "I am getting to know you," he said, "and I like what I see." Something passed between them then, a connection that had nothing to do with the investigation. Henry felt it like a physical pull, and from the way her breath caught, he thought she felt it too. But this was neither the time nor the place to explore whatever was growing between them. First, he needed to clear her name and find the real killer. He stood up reluctantly. "I should go. There are more people I need to talk to before dark, but I will be back tomorrow." "Mr. Xavier," she said as he turned to leave. "Henry, thank you for believing in me, for not giving up. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You do not owe me anything," he said. "Just hold on a little longer, we will get through this." He left the jail and spent the rest of the afternoon and evening talking to people around town. He spoke to the other parents whose children had died, trying to find out if any of them had noticed anything unusual in the days before the fire. He talked to the night watchman who had first spotted the smoke. He visited the blacksmith, Jonas Patterson, and found a bitter, angry man who indeed seemed to harbor resentment toward Meredith, but who also had an alibi for the night of the fire. He had been at the saloon until well past midnight, and at least a dozen men could confirm it. By the time the sun set behind the mountains, casting the valley into deep shadow, Henry was tired and frustrated. He had learned a lot, but he still did not have the crucial piece of evidence he needed to prove Meredith's innocence and identify the real killer. He got a room at the hotel and lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking. 6 children had been lured back to the schoolhouse in the middle of the night. How had that been accomplished? What could have convinced them to sneak out of their homes and go there? It had to have been something compelling, something they could not resist, and then it hit him. What if they had been told their teacher needed them? What if someone had impersonated Meredith, leaving notes for the children saying there was an emergency at the school, or a special midnight lesson, or some other reason they needed to come? Children would respond to that, especially if they trusted their teacher. He sat up, suddenly energized. That had to be it. And if he was right, there might still be evidence. The families might have found notes in their children's rooms after the fire. In their grief, they might not have thought much of them, but those notes could be the key to everything. First thing tomorrow, he would start asking about that. But it was too late tonight. He forced himself to lie back down and close his eyes, knowing he needed rest if he was going to solve this case before the circuit judge arrived. He dreamed that night of blue eyes and quiet strength, of a woman who needed him as much as he was beginning to realize he needed her. The next morning dawned gray and cool, with clouds gathering over the mountains. Henry was up before sunrise, washing at the basin in his room and dressing quickly. He grabbed a quick breakfast at the hotel restaurant and then headed out into the quiet streets of St. Elmo. His first stop was the Sullivan house. He knocked on the door just as the sun was breaking through the clouds, and after a moment, it was opened by a woman with red-rimmed eyes and a black mourning dress. "Mrs. Sullivan," he presumed. "I am sorry to bother you so early, madam," he said gently. "My name is Henry Xavier. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about your daughter." Her face crumpled slightly. "Please, I cannot talk about this right now. My husband already spoke with you. I understand, and I am deeply sorry for your loss. But I think I may have discovered something important, and I need your help. When you cleaned out Mary's room after the fire, did you find any notes? Perhaps something that looked like it was from her teacher?" Mrs. Sullivan frowned. There was a piece of paper on her bedside table. "I thought she had just been practicing her letters before bed. But now that you mention it, the handwriting did not look like Mary's. It was too neat, too adult." Henry's pulse quickened. "Do you still have that paper?" "I think so. I have not had the heart to go through her things yet." "Everything is still as she left it." Her voice broke on the last words, and Henry felt a surge of sympathy for her grief, but he pressed on, knowing this could be crucial. "Would you be willing to show it to me?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Come in." She led him upstairs to a small bedroom that was painfully neat, with a child's drawings pinned to the walls and a rag doll sitting on the carefully made bed. Henry had to swallow, past the lump in his throat as he looked around. This room was a shrine to a little girl who would never grow up. Mrs. Sullivan picked up a folded piece of paper from the bedside table and handed it to him with trembling fingers. Henry unfolded it carefully and read the words written in a flowing, adult hand. "Mary, please come to the schoolhouse at midnight tonight." I have left something special for you and the other students. Do not tell your parents. It is a surprise. Miss Fletcher." He felt a cold fury settle in his chest. This was it. This was the evidence he needed. Someone had forged Meredith's handwriting and used it to lure the children to their deaths. "May I keep this?" he asked Mrs. Sullivan. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "If it helps find the truth, take it. I just want to know why this happened, why my baby had to die." "I am going to find out," Henry promised her, "and whoever did this will pay for it." He left the Sullivan house and went immediately to the other families. In each case, he found similar notes, all forged in Meredith's handwriting, all promising something special at the schoolhouse at midnight. The parents had not thought much of them in the immediate aftermath of the fire, too overwhelmed by grief to question why their children had received such messages. But now, gathered together, the notes painted a clear picture of premeditation and malice. Someone had carefully planned this tragedy, forging notes in Meredith's handwriting to lure the children to the school, then setting the building ablaze and making sure the door was locked so they could not escape. The handkerchief had been planted to implicate her, and the killer had counted on the town's grief and anger to do the rest. But who? Who could have had access to examples of Meredith's handwriting? Who would have known enough about her schedule and habits to frame her so effectively? Henry thought about it as he walked back toward the jail, the forged notes carefully folded in his pocket. A teacher's handwriting would be seen by many people. Parents received notes about their children's progress. The school board would have official documents. Anyone who had a child in the school would have examples they could use to practice forging her script. He needed to find out who had the skill to forge handwriting and the motive to want Meredith blamed for murder. And he needed to do it quickly, because the circuit judge was due to arrive in 5 days, and if Henry did not have solid proof by then, Meredith would hang. When he reached the jail, he found Sheriff Grayson sitting at his desk, looking haggard and tired. The sheriff looked up as Henry entered, and his expression was wary. "Xavier, what do you want now?" Henry pulled out the notes and laid them on the desk. "I want you to look at these. I found them in the homes of the children who died. They are all forged notes, supposedly from Miss Fletcher, asking the children to come to the schoolhouse at midnight." The sheriff picked up one of the notes and examined it, his frown deepening. "This looks like her handwriting. That is the point. Someone forged it to lure those children to their deaths. This proves that Miss Fletcher was set up. She did not write these notes. She was asleep in her room at the boarding house when the fire started." Grayson studied the notes for a long moment, and Henry could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. "This does not prove she is innocent. She could have written these herself. Why would she? If she wanted to murder those children, why go to all the trouble of forging notes? She had access to the schoolhouse. She could have done it much more simply. These notes prove that someone else planned this crime and deliberately tried to frame her for it." The sheriff was quiet, his jaw working. Finally, he said, "Even if you are right, this does not tell us who the real killer is." "No, but it points us in the right direction. We are looking for someone who had access to examples of Miss Fletcher's handwriting, someone with the skill to forge it convincingly, and someone with a motive to want her blamed for murder. That could be any number of people. Then we narrow it down. Think, Sheriff. Who in this town has reason to hate Miss Fletcher? Who might want to see her hang?" Grayson shook his head slowly. "I have known that woman for 3 years. She has always been well liked. I cannot think of anyone who would want to hurt her." Henry felt his frustration rising. There has to be someone. People do not commit murder and arson without a reason. What about her predecessor? The teacher who had the job before she came to St. Elmo? That was old Mr. Carson. He retired and moved to live with his daughter in Denver. He had nothing but good things to say about Miss Fletcher when she took over his position. What about the other candidates for the teaching position? Was there anyone else who wanted the job and did not get it? The sheriff's eyes widened slightly. There was one person, Margaret Thorne. She was the daughter of one of the town founders, and she was furious when the school board chose Miss Fletcher over her. Said it was an insult to give the position to an outsider when there was a perfectly qualified local candidate. Where is Margaret Thorne now? She left town about 2 years ago. Last I heard, she was living in Colorado Springs. Henry felt his excitement deflate. Another dead end, but he was not ready to give up yet. Is there anyone else? Anyone at all who might have had a grudge? The sheriff thought about it for a long moment. There is one person, he finally said slowly. Robert Dalton. He is a clerk at the general store. He courted Miss Fletcher fairly seriously about a year ago, but she turned down his proposal. He took it hard, really hard. For months afterward, he would drink too much at the saloon and talk about how she had humiliated him, how she thought she was too good for a simple store clerk. Is he still in town? Yes, he still works at the store. Henry felt a surge of excitement. I need to talk to him. Do you know where I can find him? He lives in a room above the store. But Xavier, you should be careful. If Dalton is involved in this, he is extremely dangerous. 6 children are dead. He will not hesitate to kill again if he feels threatened. I can handle myself. But Sheriff, I need you to do something for me. I need you to compare the handwriting on these notes with examples of Dalton's handwriting. See if there are any similarities. Grayson nodded slowly. I will do that. And Xavier, if you are right about this, if Dalton is the one who did this, I owe you and Miss Fletcher an apology. Save your apologies for after we catch him, Henry said. He turned to go, then paused. Can I see Miss Fletcher for a few minutes? The sheriff gestured toward the back. Go ahead. Henry walked back to the cell, and Meredith stood up as soon as she saw him, her face full of hope and fear. Did you find something? He told her about the forged notes and watched as relief and horror warred on her face. Someone did this deliberately, she whispered. Someone wanted those children dead and me blamed for it. But who could do something so evil? I am working on that. But Meredith, I need to ask you about Robert Dalton. The sheriff said he proposed to you about a year ago and you turned him down. Her face paled. Robert. Yes, he did propose. But I thought he had accepted my refusal. He seemed disappointed but understanding at the time. The sheriff says he was angry for months afterward. Did he ever threaten you or make you feel unsafe? She thought about it, her brow furrowed. Not directly. But there were a few times when I felt like someone was watching me, and once I turned around and saw him standing across the street, just staring. When I waved at him, he turned and walked away quickly. I thought it was odd, but I did not think much of it. Henry's jaw tightened. That matches the description you gave of the man you saw watching the schoolhouse. Tall, wearing a long coat. Robert does wear a long coat, she said slowly, and he is tall. But surely he could not have done something like this. It is too horrible. People do terrible things when they feel scorned or humiliated. And if he was obsessed with you, if he blamed you for his unhappiness, he might have convinced himself that you deserved to be punished. Henry reached through the bars and took her hand, squeezing gently. I am going to talk to him. I am going to get the truth out of him, and then you are going to be free. She held onto his hand tightly, and he could feel her trembling. Be careful, Henry. If he really did this, if he is capable of murdering children, then he will not hesitate to hurt you too. I will be careful, he promised. Just hold on a little longer. He left the jail and walked toward the general store, his mind racing. Robert Dalton. It made sense. A man who felt rejected and humiliated, who had been watching Meredith obsessively, who had the opportunity to learn her handwriting from the many notes and assignments that passed through the general store when parents came in to talk about their children's schoolwork. He would have had access to kerosene and matches. He could have forged the notes, left them for the children, and then waited for them to arrive at the schoolhouse before setting the fire. But Henry needed proof. He needed something concrete that would stand up in court and convince a jury. The forged notes were a start, but he needed more. He needed a confession or physical evidence linking Dalton to the crime. The general store was a large building in the center of town, its windows full of goods from calico fabric to farm tools to tinned food. A bell jangled as Henry pushed open the door and stepped inside. The store was empty except for a man behind the counter, thin and pale with thinning brown hair and nervous eyes. He looked up as Henry entered, and his expression was immediately wary. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice tight. "Are you Robert Dalton?" "Yes. Who is asking?" "Henry Xavier. I am investigating the schoolhouse fire." Something flickered in Dalton's eyes there and gone in an instant. Fear, guilt. It was hard to say. "I already talked to the sheriff. I was home asleep when the fire started." "Can anyone confirm that?" "I live alone. But I had nothing to do with it." Henry moved closer to the counter, his gaze never leaving Dalton's face. "I have been talking to people around town. They say you were quite upset when Miss Fletcher turned down your proposal last year." Dalton's face flushed. "That is none of your business, and it has nothing to do with the fire." "Does it not? You felt rejected and humiliated. You spent months drinking and complaining about how she thought she was too good for you." "That sounds like the kind of anger that could fester, that could turn into something darker." "I do not have to listen to this." Dalton started to turn away, but Henry reached across the counter and grabbed his arm. 6 children are dead. An innocent woman is sitting in jail, facing the noose for a crime she did not commit, and I think you know something about it." Dalton jerked his arm free, his eyes wild. "You cannot prove anything. You are just making accusations." "I found notes in the homes of the dead children." Notes supposedly from Miss Fletcher, asking them to come to the schoolhouse at midnight. But Miss Fletcher did not write those notes. Someone forged her handwriting. Someone who had access to examples of her script. Someone who wanted her blamed for the fire. Henry leaned forward. "Someone like you, Dalton. You see her handwriting all the time when parents come in here talking about their children's schoolwork. You would know how to copy it." Dalton backed away from the counter, shaking his head. "You are crazy. I did not do anything." "Then let me see your handwriting. Write something for me, right now. If it does not match the forged notes, I will leave you alone." "No. Get out of my store." Henry could see the guilt written all over the man's face, in the way his hands trembled and his eyes darted toward the door like he was thinking of running. But Henry needed more than just suspicion. He needed proof. "Where were you really on the night of the fire, Dalton? Not asleep in your room. Where were you?" "I was home. I told you." "I do not believe you. I think you were at the schoolhouse." "I think you lured those children there with forged notes, and then you locked them inside and set the building ablaze. And I think you planted Miss Fletcher's handkerchief to make sure she was blamed for it." "You cannot prove any of that." Dalton's voice rose to a shout. "You have no evidence." "Actually, I do. I have the forged notes, and I am willing to bet that when the sheriff compares the handwriting on those notes to yours, he is going to find some very interesting similarities." Dalton's face went from flushed to pale in an instant. "The handwriting does not matter. Lots of people could have written those notes. But not everyone had a motive. Not everyone had reason to hate Miss Fletcher and want to see her destroyed." Henry's voice was hard now, relentless. "You killed those children to get revenge on a woman who had the audacity to reject you. You murdered 6 innocent kids because you could not handle being told no." She humiliated me. The words burst out of Dalton like they had been building for months. She made me look like a fool in front of the whole town. I offered her everything, a good home, a respectable life, and she threw it back in my face like it meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. So you decided to destroy her life in return. She deserved it. She deserved to lose everything, to feel the pain I felt when she rejected me. Dalton was shaking now, his voice thick with rage and years of festering resentment. I wanted her to suffer. I wanted her to know what it was like to have everything taken away. And the children, what did they do to deserve death? For a moment, something like remorse flickered across Dalton's face. That was never supposed to happen. They were just supposed to be there, supposed to be found unharmed in the morning after the fire. It was just meant to look like she had tried to kill them, not that she had succeeded. But they panicked when the fire started. They tried to break down the door and the smoke got too thick. By the time I realized something was wrong, it was too late. Henry felt sick. This pathetic, bitter man had murdered 6 children essentially by accident, all as part of a twisted scheme to frame a woman who had done nothing wrong except refuse his marriage proposal. You are going to hang for this, Dalton. You are going to pay for what you did. Dalton seemed to realize what he had just admitted. His eyes widened with panic, and his hand dropped below the counter. Henry saw the movement and reacted instinctively, diving to the side just as Dalton brought up a pistol and fired. The bullet smashed into the wall behind where Henry had been standing, and then Henry was rolling behind a display of flour sacks, his own gun clearing leather in one smooth motion. "Do not make this worse," Henry called out. "Put the gun down and come peacefully. You will get a trial, a chance to tell your side." "I am not hanging," Dalton fired again, the bullet punching through a flour sack and sending up a cloud of white powder. "I will not let them put a noose around my neck." Henry returned fire, aiming carefully over the barrels. He did not want to kill Dalton if he could help it. The man needed to face justice in court, needed to clear Meredith's name publicly with his confession. But Dalton was clearly past the point of reason, driven by desperation and panic. They exchanged several more shots, the confined space of the store making the gunfire deafening. Henry could hear shouts from outside as people reacted to the sound of shooting. The sheriff would be here soon, but Henry needed to end this before someone else got hurt. He feinted to the left, drawing Dalton's fire, and then moved quickly to the right, getting a clear line of sight on the man behind the counter. "Drop it, Dalton. It is over." Dalton turned the gun toward him, and Henry had no choice. He fired once precisely, and Dalton cried out as the bullet struck his gun hand. The pistol clattered to the floor, and Dalton collapsed against the counter, clutching his bloody hand. Henry moved forward quickly, kicking the gun away and covering Dalton with his own weapon. "Stay down. Do not move." The door burst open and Sheriff Grayson rushed in, his own gun drawn. He took in the scene at a glance and his face went hard. "What the hell happened here?" Dalton confessed. Henry said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He admitted to forging the notes, to luring the children to the schoolhouse, to setting the fire and planting the handkerchief to frame Miss Fletcher. And then he tried to shoot me to keep me quiet. The sheriff moved to Dalton, grabbing the injured man and hauling him to his feet. "Is this true? Did you kill those children?" Dalton was crying now. All his rage collapsed into despair. "It was an accident. They were not supposed to die. It was just supposed to look like she tried to hurt them, but everything went wrong. Everything went so wrong." "You murdered 6 children," Grayson said, his voice thick with fury and grief. "You burned them alive because you were angry at their teacher. You let this whole town believe an innocent woman was guilty. Let us put her in jail and prepare to hang her, all to save your own miserable hide. More people were crowding into the store now, drawn by the gunfire and the commotion. Word was spreading fast through the town. Henry heard gasps and cries of shock as people realized what had happened, as they understood that they had been ready to execute an innocent woman while the real killer walked free among them. "Get him to the jail," Henry said to the sheriff, "and send someone to fetch the doctor for his hand. I want him alive to stand trial." Grayson nodded and began dragging Dalton toward the door. The crowd parted to let them through, and Henry heard angry shouts beginning to rise. The same people who had been ready to lynch Meredith yesterday were now turning their fury on Robert Dalton. It would have been poetic justice, except that Henry knew mob violence was never justice, no matter who it was directed at. He followed the sheriff and his prisoner out into the street, where what seemed like half the town had gathered. The anger in the air was palpable, dangerous. Henry pushed through the crowd, staying close to Grayson as they made their way toward the jail. "Murderer!" someone shouted. "Hang him! He killed our children. Make him pay." The crowd surged forward, hands reaching for Dalton. Sheriff Grayson drew his gun and fired a shot into the air. "Everyone back. There will be no lynching in my town. This man will stand trial and face justice proper, just like Miss Fletcher would have. Now all of you get back to your homes before I start arresting people for attempted vigilantism." His voice, backed by the authority of his office and the gun in his hand, had the desired effect. The crowd fell back, though the anger did not dissipate. Henry helped the sheriff get Dalton into the jail and locked in a cell. Only then did he allow himself to relax slightly. "Thank you," Grayson said quietly. "If you had not figured this out, we would have hanged an innocent woman. I would have hanged an innocent woman." He looked old suddenly, worn down by the weight of what had almost happened. "You were just doing your job based on the evidence you had," Henry said. "Dalton did a good job of framing her, but Miss Fletcher needs to be released immediately, and the town needs to hear what really happened. I will take care of it." The sheriff walked back to Meredith's cell and unlocked the door. "Miss Fletcher, you are free to go. I owe you an enormous apology." "We all do." Meredith walked out of the cell slowly, as if she could not quite believe it was real. Her eyes found Henry's, and the relief and gratitude in them made his chest tight. Without thinking about it, he moved to her and pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, burying her face against his chest and beginning to sob, all the fear and tension of the past days finally releasing in a storm of tears. Henry held her, one hand stroking her hair gently, murmuring quiet reassurances. "It is over. You are safe now. He cannot hurt you anymore." She clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had been turned upside down. And in a way, he supposed he was. He had been the one person who believed in her, who had stood by her when everyone else was ready to see her hang. That created a bond that went deeper than mere gratitude. After a few minutes, her sobs quieted and she pulled back slightly, wiping at her eyes. "I am sorry. I did not mean to fall apart like that. You have nothing to apologize for. You have been through hell. You are entitled to cry." She looked up at him, and he was struck again by the beauty in her face, a beauty that had nothing to do with her features and everything to do with the strength and kindness that shone through her eyes. "You saved my life, Henry. If not for you, I would be dead within the week. I do not know how to thank you. You do not need to thank me. I just did what was right." "No." She shook her head, her hand coming up to rest over his heart. "You did more than that. You believed in me when no one else would. You saw past the evidence and the anger, and you trusted that I was telling the truth. That means more to me than I can ever say." There was something in her eyes, in the way she was looking at him, that made Henry's heart beat faster. He was suddenly very aware of how close she was, of the way she felt in his arms. He wanted to kiss her, wanted it with a fierceness that surprised him. But this was not the time. She needed space to recover from her ordeal, not to be pushed into something she might not be ready for. He forced himself to step back slightly, though he kept his hands on her arms. "You should go back to the boarding house, get some rest. Mrs. Winters has been worried sick about you. Will I see you again?" The question was quiet, almost hesitant, and Henry realized she was afraid he would just disappear now that his job was done. "Yes," he said firmly. "You will definitely see me again, but first, let's get you out of here." They walked out of the jail together, and the crowd that had gathered outside fell silent as they emerged. Meredith held her head high, though Henry could feel her trembling slightly. He stayed close to her side, a silent support and protection. Sheriff Grayson stepped forward, and his voice carried across the crowd. "Folks, I have an announcement to make. Miss Meredith Fletcher has been cleared of all charges related to the schoolhouse fire." The real perpetrator was Robert Dalton, who has confessed to forging notes in Miss Fletcher's handwriting to lure the children to the school, then setting the fire and planting evidence to frame her. He is now in custody and will stand trial for murder. A stunned silence greeted this announcement, and then the murmurs began. Henry could see shock and shame on many faces as people realized how close they had come to committing a terrible injustice. Mrs. Winters pushed through the crowd and enveloped Meredith in a fierce hug. "Oh, my dear girl. I am so glad you are safe. Come home with me. Let me take care of you." Meredith nodded, but her eyes stayed on Henry. "Will you come by later? I would like to talk to you." "I will be there," he promised. He watched as Mrs. Winters led her away, the older woman keeping a protective arm around her shoulders. Other townspeople approached them, offering apologies and expressions of relief. Henry felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease. Meredith would be all right. The town would support her now, make up for the terrible mistake they had almost made. Over the next few hours, the story of what had really happened spread through St. Elmo like wildfire. Henry found himself the recipient of grateful thanks from the parents whose children had died, from Sheriff Grayson, from people he had never even met. They all wanted to shake his hand, to tell him what a hero he was. But Henry did not feel like a hero. He had just done what needed to be done, what anyone with a conscience should have done. As evening approached, he made his way to the boarding house. Mrs. Winters let him in with a warm smile. "She is upstairs in her room. Go on up. Second door on the right." Henry climbed the creaking stairs and knocked gently on the door. Meredith's voice called for him to enter, and he pushed the door open. She was sitting by the window, looking out at the mountains in the distance. She had changed into a clean dress, a simple blue calico that matched her eyes, and her hair was neatly pinned up again. She looked more like herself now, more composed, though he could still see the shadows of her ordeal in her eyes. She stood as he entered, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. Then she crossed the room and took his hands in hers. "I have been thinking all afternoon about what I want to say to you," she began, "about how to express what your faith in me has meant. But I do not think there are words adequate to the task. You gave me hope when I had none. You fought for me when no one else would. You risked your own safety and reputation to uncover the truth. I will never forget that, Henry. Never." "Meredith," he said softly, "I need you to understand something. I did not just do this because it was right, though it was. I did it because from the moment I saw you in that cell, I knew you were innocent. I knew you were someone special, someone worth fighting for. And over these past days, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your kindness even in the worst circumstances, I have come to care for you more than I probably should." Her eyes widened slightly, and he saw hope kindle in them. "You care for me?" "Yes. I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a few days, but sometimes that is all it takes to recognize something real, something worth holding on to." He squeezed her hands gently. "I do not expect anything from you. You have been through a trauma and you need time to heal. But I wanted you to know how I feel." She was quiet for a moment, and he could see her thinking, processing his words. Then a slow smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "I care for you too, Henry. I have been trying not to think about it, trying to focus on just surviving, but the truth is that you have been in my thoughts constantly. The way you looked at me with belief instead of condemnation. The way you held me today when I fell apart. The way you make me feel safe and valued and seen. I do not know if this is wise, falling for someone so quickly, but I cannot seem to help it." His heart soared at her words, and he pulled her closer, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Then maybe we can figure out together if this is wisdom or madness." "Maybe we can," she whispered. And then she was rising on her toes and he was bending down, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was a kiss that spoke of new beginnings, of hope rising from the ashes of tragedy. It was a kiss that sealed a connection forged in the fire of adversity, and it felt like the most right thing in the world. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing a little harder, and there was a light in Meredith's eyes that chased away the last of the shadows. "Stay for dinner," she said. "Mrs. Winters always makes too much food anyway, and I want to hear more about you, about your life, your dreams, everything." "I would like that," Henry said, and he realized he meant it with every fiber of his being. He wanted to know everything about this remarkable woman, wanted to spend hours talking with her and learning her thoughts and sharing his own. They went downstairs together, and Mrs. Winters beamed when she saw them holding hands. She set an extra place at the table without being asked, and over a hearty meal of roast chicken and vegetables, Henry found himself opening up in a way he rarely did. He told Meredith about his childhood in Texas, about the hard years after his parents died when he had to make his own way in the world. He told her about the false accusation in Kansas and how it had shaped his views on justice and truth. He told her about his work as a ranch hand, about his love for the wide open spaces and the satisfaction of honest labor. And Meredith told him about her own past, about growing up in Missouri with parents who had not understood her love of learning, about the teacher who had changed her life by believing in her potential. She told him about the joy she found in teaching, in watching children's faces light up when they mastered something new. She spoke about the pain of losing her students in the fire and how she would carry that grief with her always, even though she knew it was not her fault. They talked late into the evening until Mrs. Winters finally shooed Henry out with a knowing smile, telling him he could come back tomorrow. As he walked back to his hotel through the quiet streets, Henry felt a lightness in his chest that he had not experienced in years. For so long, he had been drifting, moving from job to job and town to town with no real roots or connections. But now, for the first time, he could imagine putting down roots. He could imagine a future that included someone else, someone who made him want to be better and do better. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Robert Dalton was formally charged with 6 counts of murder, along with arson and attempted murder for his attack on Henry. The circuit judge arrived and convened a special session to hear the case. Henry testified about his investigation and about Dalton's confession. Other witnesses came forward with information that supported the case against Dalton. The forged notes were entered into evidence, and a handwriting expert confirmed that they matched Dalton's script, not Meredith's. The trial lasted 2 days, and the verdict was never in doubt. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding Dalton guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to hang, and this time, there was no question of justice being served. The man who had murdered 6 innocent children would pay the ultimate price for his crime. Throughout the trial, Henry and Meredith were inseparable. He attended every session, sitting in the gallery where she could see him, offering silent support. And in the evenings, they would walk together through the town or sit in the parlor of the boarding house, talking and simply being together. The town of St. Elmo slowly began to heal from the tragedy. The schoolhouse was rebuilt, with contributions from everyone in town. A memorial was erected to the 6 children who had died, a stone monument in the cemetery with their names carved into it. And Meredith, after much soul-searching, agreed to continue teaching. The new school would open in a few weeks, and she would be there to welcome a new group of students. But the biggest change in her life was Henry. What had started as gratitude and a spark of attraction had grown into something deeper, something that felt solid and real and lasting. They spent every free moment together, learning each other's quirks and preferences, sharing dreams and making plans. One evening, about 2 weeks after Dalton's trial, Henry came to call on Meredith with a serious expression on his face. They walked out to a small hill overlooking the town, where they could see the mountains rising in the distance, their peaks touched with the first snow of early autumn. "Meredith," he began, taking her hands in his, "these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. You are everything I did not know I was looking for. You are smart and kind and brave, and being with you makes me want to be the best version of myself." She smiled up at him, her eyes shining. "I feel the same way about you, Henry. You changed my life in every possible way. You saved me, but more than that, you saw me. You believed in me, and you have shown me what it means to be truly cared for." "I want to keep showing you that," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness churning in his gut. "For the rest of our lives, if you will let me. Meredith Fletcher, will you marry me?" Her breath caught, and for a moment she just stared at him. Then a radiant smile broke across her face and she threw her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, Henry, I will marry you." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing with joy. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, pouring all his love and hope for their future into the kiss. She responded with equal passion, her arms tight around him, and for several long minutes they simply held each other, letting the enormity of what they were promising to each other sink in. "I do not have a ring yet," Henry admitted ruefully. "I wanted to ask you first, make sure you would say yes before I spent money on something you might not like." She laughed, the sound like music. "I do not need a fancy ring. I just need you. But I suppose we should pick something out together, make it practical for a teacher and a ranch hand." "Actually," Henry said slowly, "I have been thinking about that. About my work, I mean. I love ranching, love working with horses and cattle. But I have been thinking that maybe it is time I stopped working for someone else and started building something of my own. There is land available north of here, good grazing land near Silver Creek. I have been saving money for years, and I have enough to make a down payment on a decent spread. It would be hard work, building up a ranch from nothing, but it would be ours, something we could build together." Meredith's eyes widened. "You want to start your own ranch?" "I do. If that is something you could see yourself being a part of. I know you love teaching, and I would never ask you to give that up. But maybe during the summers, when school is not in session, you could help me with the ranch. And eventually, when we have children, they could grow up there, learning the value of hard work and self-reliance." "Children," she repeated softly, and the wonder in her voice made his heart ache in the best possible way. "You have been thinking about our future." "Every day," he admitted. "Every moment. I see it so clearly, Meredith. A small ranch house with a view of the mountains, horses in the corral and cattle on the hills. You coming home from teaching every afternoon and me there to greet you. And someday, children running around the yard, learning to ride and helping with chores and going to school where their mother teaches them. It is a good life. A simple life, maybe, but a good one, and I want to build it with you. She was crying now, but they were happy tears. It sounds perfect, Henry. Better than anything I ever dreamed for myself. When I came to Colorado, I thought my future was just teaching, being alone but doing work I loved. I never imagined finding a partner, someone who would see me as an equal and want to build a life together. Then we are building it, he said firmly. Together. As soon as we can arrange it, we get married, and then we start making all those dreams come true. They set the wedding date for early October, giving them just over 3 weeks to prepare. It would be a simple ceremony at the church in St. Elmo, with Mrs. Winters standing up as Meredith's witness, and one of Henry's friends from the Silver Creek Ranch standing up for him. The whole town was invited, and it seemed like everyone was eager to celebrate this union born from tragedy and hardship. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Henry was busy finalizing the purchase of the land he wanted. He met with the bank, negotiated terms, and signed papers that made him a landowner for the first time in his life. The property was 200 acres of grassland and forest, with a good water source from Silver Creek running through it. There was a small, rough cabin on the land that would need work, but it was livable. They could start there and build something better as the ranch prospered. Meredith, meanwhile, was preparing to reopen the school. She threw herself into the work, cleaning and organizing the new building, planning lessons, and reaching out to families to reassure them that she was ready and able to continue teaching their children. It was not easy. Some parents were hesitant, the tragedy still too fresh. But slowly, trust was rebuilt, and by the time school opened in late September, she had almost as many students enrolled as before. Henry attended the opening day of school, standing at the back of the classroom and watching with pride as Meredith welcomed her new students. She was in her element there, patient and encouraging, drawing out the shy children and gently correcting the rowdy ones. The children responded to her warmth, and Henry could see the love she had for teaching in every gesture and word. Afterward, as the children filed out and headed home, Meredith came to him with a tired but happy smile. "How did I do?" "You were amazing," he said honestly. "Those children are lucky to have you." "I am the lucky one," she countered. "I get to do work I love with a partner who supports me." Not many women can say that. He pulled her into his arms, not caring that they were standing in full view of the schoolyard. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Meredith, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect autumn days that Colorado is famous for. The aspens were turning gold on the mountainsides, and the air was crisp and clean. Meredith woke early at the boarding house, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of nerves and excitement. Mrs. Winters helped her dress in a simple but lovely gown of cream-colored silk that they had ordered from Denver. It was not elaborate, but it was beautiful, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Meredith's hair was styled in soft curls, pinned up with a few tendrils left loose to frame her face. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the glowing woman staring back at her. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Winters said, her eyes moist. "Henry is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Meredith said, echoing the words she had spoken to Henry just days before. "A month ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I was going to hang for a crime I did not commit. And now I am getting married to the most wonderful man I have ever met, starting a new chapter of my life. It feels like a miracle." "Sometimes the darkest moments in our lives lead us to the greatest blessings," Mrs. Winters said wisely. "You have been through fire, literally and figuratively, and you have come out stronger. Henry saw that strength in you even when you could not see it yourself. That is the mark of a good man. They made their way to the church, where it seemed like the entire town had gathered. Henry was waiting at the altar, looking handsome in a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed and his face clean-shaven. When he saw Meredith walking down the aisle toward him, his face lit up with such love and joy that she felt her heart might burst. The ceremony was short and sweet. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about weathering storms together and building a life on a foundation of trust and respect. Henry and Meredith exchanged simple gold bands and spoke their vows in voices that rang with sincerity and emotion. I, Henry David Xavier, take you, Meredith Ann Fletcher, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to stand by you in good times and bad, to believe in you when others doubt, to protect you from harm, and to love you with all that I am for as long as we both shall live. I, Meredith Ann Fletcher, take you, Henry David Xavier, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand by you in good times and bad, to support your dreams as you have supported mine, to build a life with you that honors the gift we have been given, and to love you with all that I am for as long as we both shall live. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Henry cupped Meredith's face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that many in the congregation found themselves wiping away tears. This was more than just a wedding. It was a celebration of justice, of truth prevailing, of love born from the ashes of tragedy. The reception was held at the church hall, with food and music and dancing. People who had been ready to lynch Meredith just weeks ago now came to congratulate her and wish her well. She accepted their good wishes graciously, understanding that they had been acting out of grief and pain, not malice. Forgiveness, she was learning, was an essential part of healing. As the sun began to set, Henry and Meredith slipped away from the celebration. They had borrowed a wagon for the journey to their new home, their first night together as husband and wife to be spent in the rough cabin on their land. The ride took about an hour, and they talked and laughed the whole way, giddy with happiness and the enormity of what they had done. When they reached the property, Henry helped Meredith down from the wagon and then swept her up into his arms. "What are you doing?" she asked, laughing. "Carrying my bride across the threshold," he said with a grin. "It is tradition, is it not?" "I suppose it is," she agreed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Then by all means, husband, carry me home." He did just that, pushing open the door of the cabin and carrying her inside. It was a single room, rustic and simple, but they had spent the past few days making it as comfortable as possible. There was a bed with clean linens, a table and 2 chairs, a wood stove for cooking and heat, and a few other basic necessities. It was not fancy, but it was theirs. Henry set Meredith down gently and lit a lantern, filling the room with warm, golden light. Then he turned to her and held out his hand. "Dance with me." There was no music, but Meredith did not care. She took his hand and let him pull her close, and they swayed together in the lantern light, holding each other and simply being together. This was what marriage was supposed to be, she thought. 2 people choosing each other every day, building a life together through love and commitment and shared dreams. "I love you, Meredith Xavier," Henry whispered against her hair. "I will love you until the day I die, and beyond that if it is possible." "I love you too, Henry," she whispered back. "Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for fighting for me. Thank you for being exactly who you are." They made love that night with tenderness and passion, exploring each other and learning what brought pleasure and joy. It was new and a little awkward, but it was also beautiful and right, the physical expression of the emotional and spiritual bond they had formed. Afterward, They lay tangled together in the bed, Meredith's head resting on Henry's chest as he stroked her hair. Through the window, they could see stars scattered across the sky like diamonds, and in the distance, the mountains loomed dark against the night. "This is just the beginning," Henry said softly. "We have our whole lives ahead of us to build this ranch, to raise a family, to make a difference in this corner of the world." "I know," Meredith said, smiling against his chest, "and I cannot wait to see what we build together." The first year of their marriage was hard work, but deeply satisfying. Henry spent long days working on the ranch, building fences and corrals, breaking horses, and slowly building up his herd of cattle. Meredith taught school during the academic year, and in the summers, she helped Henry with the ranch work. She learned to ride well, to rope and brand cattle, to manage the accounts and make sure they were spending wisely and saving for the future. They worked side by side, building their dream together. Some days were exhausting, filled with setbacks and challenges. But every night they came home to each other, and that made everything worthwhile. They talked about their days over simple dinners, planned for the future, and made love with the easy comfort of a couple who knew and trusted each other completely. By the end of that first year, the ranch was starting to thrive. They had 50 head of cattle, good horses for riding and working, and enough income to start planning the expansion of their cabin into a proper house. And Meredith was pregnant with their first child. She told Henry one evening in early autumn, almost a year to the day after their wedding. They were sitting on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "Henry," she said, her voice soft but full of emotion, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, immediately attentive. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Everything is right. I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, and then a grin spread across his face so wide it threatened to split his cheeks. "Truly, we are going to be parents." "Yes," she said, laughing at his expression. "In about 6 months, if I am calculating correctly." He whooped with joy and pulled her into his arms, careful not to squeeze too hard. "This is the best news I have ever received. We are going to have a family, Meredith. A real family." "We already are a family," she corrected gently. "But yes, we are about to expand it." That winter was bitterly cold, and Meredith's pregnancy progressed steadily. She continued teaching until she was too far along to manage the walk into town every day. And then she reluctantly turned over her duties to a substitute teacher hired by the school board. She spent her days at the ranch, preparing for the baby's arrival, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, and dreaming about what their child would be like. Henry was attentive and protective, almost comically so. He fussed over her constantly, making sure she was not working too hard or getting cold or doing anything that might put the baby at risk. Meredith found it endearing even when it was a bit much. In April of 1880, during a spring storm that dusted the mountains with fresh snow, Meredith went into labor. Henry rode like the wind to fetch the midwife from town, and then spent the next 12 hours pacing the cabin floor while Meredith labored in the bedroom with the midwife attending her. Finally, as dawn was breaking, he heard the sound he had been waiting for, the thin, outraged wail of a newborn baby. The midwife emerged from the bedroom with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Xavier, a healthy, strong boy, and your wife is doing well." Henry practically ran into the bedroom. Meredith was propped up in bed, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. When she saw Henry, she smiled and held out the baby toward him. "Meet your son," she said softly. Henry took the baby with trembling hands, looking down at the tiny face, the miniature features, the wisps of dark hair. His son. His and Meredith's. The enormity of it hit him like a physical blow, and he felt tears prick his eyes. "He is perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "He is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Meredith asked. They had discussed names over the winter but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Henry knew exactly what he wanted to call him. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas Henry Xavier, after one of the children who died in the fire, so that part of him lives on." Meredith's eyes filled with tears. "That is beautiful, Henry. Yes, Thomas Henry Xavier. Tommy." Little Tommy proved to be a healthy, happy baby who thrived under the loving attention of his parents. Meredith took to motherhood as naturally as she took to teaching, finding joy in every milestone and every moment. Henry was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him about the ranch and the animals and the land. When Tommy was 6 months old, Meredith felt ready to return to teaching. They hired a young woman from town to come out to the ranch during the day to look after Tommy, and Meredith resumed her position at the school. It was a good balance, allowing her to do the work she loved while still being a mother to her son. The years passed in a blur of work and joy. The ranch continued to grow, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Henry's reputation as a fair and honest rancher spread, and he was often asked for advice by other ranchers starting out. Meredith became known as one of the best teachers in Colorado, and families would sometimes move to St. Elmo specifically so their children could be taught by her. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Grace Annette in 1882, and another son they named Samuel James in 1884. Each birth was a celebration, a new member added to their growing family. The cabin was expanded into a proper house, with multiple bedrooms and a large kitchen and a parlor for entertaining. It was still simple compared to some of the grand homes in Denver, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and filled with love. The children grew up healthy and strong, learning the value of hard work and education, of kindness and integrity. Tommy showed a natural talent for ranching and loved spending time with his father in the fields. Grace was whip-smart and loved books, often begging her mother to let her help at the school. Samuel was the adventurous one, always getting into scrapes and exploring every corner of the property. On Sundays, the whole family would go into town for church, and afterward they would visit the cemetery where the memorial to the 6 children who had died in the fire stood. Meredith would bring flowers and tell her children the story of what had happened, of the tragedy and the injustice that had been righted. It was important to her that they understood that their father was a hero, that he had stood up for what was right when everyone else was wrong. "Your father saved my life," she would tell them. "He believed in me when no one else would. He fought for truth and justice, and he gave me the chance to build this life with him. Never forget that doing the right thing matters, even when it is hard, even when it costs you something." The children would nod solemnly, understanding even at their young ages that they were part of something special, that their parents' love story was intertwined with a larger narrative about courage and conviction. Henry and Meredith grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They celebrated their 10th anniversary, then their 20th, and then their 30th. Their children grew up and had children of their own. Tommy took over the management of the ranch, expanding it even further while still honoring his father's principles. Grace became a teacher like her mother, taking over the school in St. Elmo when Meredith finally retired. Samuel became a lawyer, dedicating his career to defending people who had been falsely accused, inspired by his parents' story. In their golden years, Henry and Meredith would sit on the porch of their house, the same porch where they had shared so many sunsets, and reflect on the life they had built together. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and well-managed. Their children and grandchildren visited often, filling the house with laughter and love. "You remember that day you walked into the jail and told me you believed I was innocent?" Meredith asked one evening, her hair now silver but her eyes still that same deep blue. "Of course I remember," Henry said, taking her hand in his. His own hair was white, his face lined with the years, but his grip was still strong. "It was the day my life really began." "Mine too," she said softly. "Everything I have, everything I am, started with you choosing to believe in me." "I would make that choice 1,000 times over," he said. "Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains for what must have been the 1,000th time, but it never got old. The beauty of this place, the satisfaction of a life well lived, the love that had sustained them through hard times and good, it all came together in moments like this. Henry Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by his family. Meredith held his hand until the very end, whispering words of love and gratitude for the life they had shared. She mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had been given more years together than many couples could dream of, and every one of those years had been a gift. She lived another 5 years after his death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, still sharp and engaged with the world around her. She told her story often, making sure that the next generation understood the importance of standing up for truth, of believing in people even when everyone else has given up on them, of choosing love even in the darkest circumstances. When Meredith finally passed at the age of 80, she was laid to rest beside Henry in the cemetery overlooking St. Elmo. Their gravestone was simple but meaningful. Henry David Xavier and Meredith Ann Xavier. They believed in truth, fought for justice, and built a life on love. Together in this world and the next. Years later, their great-granddaughter would write a book about their story, about the false accusation, the cowboy who believed when no one else would, and the love that grew from tragedy. The book would be read by people all over the country, inspiring others to stand up for what is right, to believe in the possibility of redemption, and to understand that true love is not just about passion, but about choosing to stand beside someone even when the whole world is against them. The ranch that Henry and Meredith built continued to thrive, passed down through the generations. The school where Meredith taught was eventually named in her honor. And in St. Elmo, their story became legend, a reminder that even in the darkest times, courage and love can triumph. The Wild West was a hard place, full of danger and injustice. But it was also a place where ordinary people could become heroes, where love could flourish in unexpected places, where one person's choice to believe could change everything. Henry and Meredith's story was proof of that, a testament to the power of faith, the importance of truth, and the transformative nature of love. In the end, their story was not just about a tragedy averted or justice served. It was about two people who found each other in the worst possible circumstances and chose to build something beautiful together. It was about a cowboy who saw past the accusations to the truth beneath, and a woman who found the strength to keep going because someone believed in her. It was about a love that started in a jail cell and grew into a legacy that would endure for generations. And in the mountains of Colorado, where the aspens still turn gold in autumn and the snow still caps the peaks in winter, their memory lives on. Not just in the descendants who carry their names and their values, but in the very land they worked so hard to build into something lasting. The Xavier Ranch, with its rolling pastures and well-tended fences, stands as a monument to what two people can accomplish when they choose to believe in each other and in the possibility of building something good from the ashes of tragedy. That is the true legacy of Henry and Meredith Xavier. Not just a story of false accusation and vindication, though it is that. Not just a love story, though it is certainly that too. But a story about the fundamental human capacity for goodness, for choosing right over easy, for believing in truth even when everyone else has given up on it. It is a story that reminds us that one person's faith in another can quite literally save a life and change the course of history. Their love story became the stuff of legend in St. Elmo and the surrounding areas, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But those who knew them, who had seen them working side by side on the ranch or walking hand in hand through town, knew that the reality was even better than the legend. Because the reality was two imperfect people who chose each other every single day, who worked through hardships and celebrated triumphs, who built a family and a legacy on the foundation of mutual respect and unwavering love. The town of St. Elmo itself changed after the tragedy. The shock of how close they had come to executing an innocent woman, of how easily they had been manipulated by a killer's careful planning, left a lasting impact. People became more careful about rushing to judgment, more willing to look at evidence critically, more aware that things are not always as they seem. In that way, even the tragedy itself, terrible as it was, led to positive change. And through it all, through the decades that followed that terrible September in 1878, Henry and Meredith's love was a constant. It was the rock that they built everything else on, the source of their strength in hard times and their joy in good ones. It was a love that asked nothing but gave everything, that believed without proof and held on without hesitation. When people asked Meredith in her later years what the secret was to their long and happy marriage, she would smile and say, "He chose to believe in me when it would have been easier not to. He stood up for me when it put him at risk. That is the kind of person you build a life with." And every day after that first one, I chose to be worthy of that belief, and he chose to keep giving me reasons to love him. That is all marriage is, really. Choosing each other over and over until choosing becomes as natural as breathing. And when people asked Henry, he would say simply, "I saw her, really saw her in that jail cell. Not the accusations, not what other people said about her, but who she really was. And what I saw was someone worth fighting for. The rest just followed naturally." Their story ended, as all stories must, with their deaths. But the love they shared, the family they built, the values they instilled, and the legacy they left behind, those things lived on. In their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. In the ranch that still bore their name. In the school where generations of children learned to read and write and think. In the memorial to the 6 children whose deaths had inadvertently brought Henry and Meredith together. Love, Henry and Meredith proved, is not just a feeling. It is a choice, made over and over again in the small moments and the large ones. It is believing in someone when they cannot believe in themselves. It is standing beside them when the world stands against them. It is building a life together, one day at a time, with patience and commitment and unwavering faith in each other. That was the true story of Henry and Meredith Xavier. Not just a tale of the Wild West, though it was certainly that. Not just a story of injustice righted, though that was part of it. But fundamentally, it was a story about the transformative power of love, about 2 people who found each other in the worst possible circumstances and chose to build the best possible life together. And in that small corner of Colorado, where the mountains touch the sky and the wind whispers through the grass, their love story lives on, a testament to the enduring power of faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these, as the good book says, is love. And Henry and Meredith Xavier proved it every single day of their lives together.